In 2017, off the southern tip of Africa, the most feared predator in the ocean simply vanished. Not one, not a few. An entire population of great white sharks abandoned waters they had ruled for generations, places where divers had reliably watched them for decades. They left no bodies in the open water, no struggle anyone could film, no obvious reason. They were just gone, and the only clues left behind were carcasses washing up on the beaches, adult great whites 4 to 5 meters long, dead. But it was not the fact that they were dead that made the scientists go quiet. It was what had been taken from them. Each shark had a single clean tear opened along the underside, at the shoulder, almost surgical. And through that opening, one organ had been removed with a precision that should not have been possible. The rest of the animal was untouched. Something had learned to butcher the ocean's apex predator and eat only one specific part of it. And it would take years of carcasses, drone footage, and tracking data to understand what was doing it and why. I want to start with the part of this story that I cannot stop thinking about, because it is the part that turns a nature documentary into something closer to a forensic case file. When the first of these great whites washed ashore, the people who found it assumed the worst kind of ordinary thing. A boat strike, maybe. A fight between sharks, scavengers. But when a marine biologist knelt beside the body and looked at the wound, none of those explanations fit. The opening was too deliberate. It ran along a precise line. And inside, the great white's liver, an enormous oil-rich organ that in a large shark can weigh as much as a grown adult human, was simply removed. Not torn out in a frenzy, removed. The heart was still there. The stomach was still there. The gills, the spine, the jaws full of those famous serrated teeth, all intact. Whatever had done this had reached into the most dangerous fish in the sea, extracted one specific piece, and left everything else to sink. Here is what I need you to understand before we go any further. There was no camera watching when these kills happened. For years, the only account that would ever exist of what took place in that water was sealed inside the bodies that drifted onto the sand. Those carcasses were witnesses. Each one was a sealed envelope, a message in a bottle delivered by the tide, and every wound was a line of testimony written in a language nobody had read before. The job of the people studying them was to learn to read it. And the first thing the testimony told them was that this was not random. It was a technique, a repeatable, learned, refined technique. Something out there had a method. There are two key facts in this case, two clues that when you put them together force a conclusion that sounds impossible until the moment it does not. I am going to give you the first one now, and I am going to hold the second one back. Because if I hand you both at once, you will jump to the answer before you have earned it. And the answer is so much stranger when you arrive at it, the way the researchers had to. So, here is the first clue. The great whites did not just die in this region. They fled it. They evacuated. Famous shark hotspots, places where tour operators had built entire businesses on the certainty that great whites would be there. Places where the cage diving boats went out every single morning and never came back empty. Those places went silent. The sharks that survived did not stick around to defend their territory. They ran. And before I show you the second clue, the one that names the thing doing this, you need to understand exactly what kind of animal we are talking about when we say great white. Because the whole horror of this story lives in how completely it inverts what you think you know. Picture the great white shark for a second. Really picture it. We have spent a century making this animal the monster at the bottom of the human imagination. It is, by almost every measure, the perfect predator. It can grow past 6 meters. It can sense a single drop of blood diluted across an Olympic swimming pool. It has electroreceptors in its snout, that let it feel the faint electrical signature of a heartbeat in total darkness. It can launch its entire body clear out of the water to hit a seal from below at a speed you would not believe unless you saw it in slow motion. It has rows of replaceable teeth and a bite that can shear through bone and cartilage like wet paper. For most of its life, the great white sits at the very top of the food web in the waters it patrols. We have a word for an animal like that. We call it an apex predator, and apex is supposed to mean exactly what it sounds like: the top, the ceiling, nothing above it, the thing that eats and is not eaten. That is the rule. The great white is supposed to be the end of the line, the final answer to the question of what eats that. For an apex predator, the honest answer is supposed to be nothing. That is what the word means. That is the whole point of it. And for as long as anyone had been watching the waters off South Africa, that rule had held. The great whites came, they hunted the seals, they ruled the kelp forests and the rocky reefs, and they had no reason on earth to be afraid of anything. They were the fear. They were what the seals dreamed about. So when an entire population of these animals, the most studied, most filmed, most mythologized predator in the ocean, picked up and fled their own kingdom, leaving behind only a trail of expertly butchered bodies with one organ missing, it broke the rule that the entire ecosystem was built on. Something had walked into the throne room, and the king had run for his life. And the only way to find out who had done it was to keep reading those carcasses, one clean wound at a time, and wait for the day the ocean finally lets someone watch it happen. Now hold that word in your head, apex, because everything that comes next is a slow demolition of it. The first carcasses had told us something was hunting the unkillable, but a wound, no matter how clean, is only half a sentence. It tells you the shark died. It does not tell you who held the knife. For that, the investigators needed the second clue, the one I told you to wait for, and it did not come from a body on a beach. It came from the sky. For years, the only witnesses had been the dead. A great white would wash up at dawn on a stretch of pale western Cape sand, and a small crowd would gather around it, the way crowds always do, phones out, kids hanging back, an old fisherman shaking his head. And every time, the people who knew what they were looking at would crouch beside that enormous animal and feel the same cold drop in the stomach. Because the body was almost perfect. The flanks were unmarked. The jaws were intact, those terrible rows of teeth still locked in their final grimace. The eyes, the gills, the long muscular tail, all of it there, all of it whole. And then they would roll the animal, or look beneath the pectoral fins and find the one thing wrong. A single, deliberate opening between the fins, low on the body, the flesh peeled back, and inside, where the largest, richest organ should have been, nothing, just an emptied cavity, clean as if it had been rinsed. Picture it the way the researchers had to. A 2-meter great white, an animal that has terrorized that coastline for centuries, lying on the sand with its liver gone and the rest of it untouched, like a wallet emptied of cash and dropped back on the pavement with the cards still inside. Whatever did this did not want the meat, did not want the fins, the muscle, the famous jaws. It wanted one thing, took only that one thing, and left a fortune of food behind to sink. That is not the behavior of something hungry and desperate. That is the behavior of something that has done this so many times it has stopped wasting effort. That is technique. That is preference. That is a creature with a taste. And here is the detail that made my skin crawl when I first sat with it. The wound was not a tear. It was not ragged, not the messy ripping you would expect from a feeding frenzy. It was, by the descriptions of the people who examined them, almost surgical. A clean separation at the shoulder, the body opened along a line, the liver lifted out and the rest released. Whatever was doing this knew shark anatomy. It knew where the liver was, knew how to get to it without shredding everything around it, and knew, crucially, to stop once it had what it came for. Sit with that. An animal in the ocean had learned not just to kill a great white, but to dissect one. The man who first put a name to this pattern was not a scientist in a lab. He was a whale-watching operator, a man who had spent a good part of his life on a boat, reading the surface of that cold green water, the way you read a familiar face. He ran trips out along the coast, taking tourists to see the seasonal giants that passed through. And he knew the regular players. He knew the seals, the dolphins, the whales that came and went with the cold currents. And one day, out on the water doing the job he'd done 1,000 times, he watched something he had no category for. He saw the killing happen, or enough of it to understand what he was looking at. He saw the predators, and he saw what they were after, and he understood, before almost anyone else, that the great whites of that coast had a problem they could not solve. What he had spotted were 2 orcas, killer whales, and here is the first thing that did not fit the textbook. Orcas, the great wandering wolves of the sea, almost always hunt the way wolves do, in pods, in families, a dozen or more working together, herding, cooperating, sharing the kill, passing knowledge from the old to the young. That is the orca we know. That is the orca on every nature documentary, sweeping the ice in numbers, washing a seal off a floe with a coordinated wave. But these were not a pod. These were 2. Just 2 males, moving up and down that coastline as a pair, year after year, like a closed partnership that needed no one else. A duo. 2 animals, doing alone what an entire family is supposed to be required for. You learn to recognize specific whales the way you learn to recognize people, by the small, permanent things. A scar, a notch, the shape of a fin against the sky. And these 2 had a feature so striking that it gave them their names, names that have since become almost legendary among the people who follow this story. Both of them had dorsal fins that had collapsed. Those tall, proud black blades that are supposed to stand straight up out of the water had instead bent over and flopped to the side. On one of them, the fin curled to the left. On the other, it curled to the right, port and starboard, the left and right sides of a ship. And so the people watching them started calling them exactly that, port and starboard, the 2 bent-finned ghosts of the Western Cape, the pair that turned up wherever the great whites started dying. For more than a decade now, those collapsed fins have been the calling card of a kingdom falling. And the more closely the scientists looked, the more they realized that what they were watching was not a string of random attacks at all, but something far stranger, far more deliberate, and far more difficult to explain away. And that something had a signature, a method, a pattern so consistent that once you knew what to look for, you could read it on a carcass the way a detective reads a crime scene, because the bodies kept coming ashore, and they all told the same story. Picture it the way the people on those beaches had to. A great white shark, a 4, 5, sometimes 6-meter animal, an apex predator that has ruled these waters since before there were primates to fear it, washes up on the sand, intact at first glance, heavy, whole. From a distance you might think it simply died and drifted in, but then you get close, and you see the wound. There is a single clean tear, almost surgical, running along the underside near the pectoral fins, the shoulder of the shark, if a shark had shoulders. One precise opening, and through that opening, the liver is gone, removed, taken. And here is the part that made the hair on the back of researchers' necks stand up. Almost nothing else was touched. The heart often still there, the stomach, the muscle, the rest of those rich internal organs left behind. The whole rest of that enormous body abandoned to sink or rot, while the one organ, the liver, had been extracted with a care that looked less like a feeding frenzy and more like a procedure. Sit with that for a second. Because we are taught to imagine predation as chaos, teeth and blood and thrashing, an animal torn apart in a cloud of pink water, everyone eating whatever they can grab. That is the violence we expect from the sea. But this was not that. This was selective. This was targeted. These 2 orcas were swimming up to the most feared fish on the planet, opening it like a drawer, taking exactly one thing out and leaving the rest. And they were doing it again and again and again. So why the liver? Why would 2 of the ocean's most intelligent hunters go to all the trouble of subduing a great white shark, an animal that is itself armed with rows of serrated teeth and a body built for nothing but killing, only to discard 90% of the meal? The answer, once you understand it, is almost elegant. A shark's liver is not like ours. In a great white, that single organ can make up as much as a quarter or even a third of the animal's entire body weight. It is vast, and it is oily, packed with a fat called squalene that the shark uses for buoyancy and energy storage. Because a shark has no swim bladder, No gas-filled balloon to keep it from sinking, so it stores its lift and its fuel as oil in that enormous liver instead, which means the liver is the richest, most calorie-dense, most efficient package of energy in the entire animal. Pound for pound, it carries more usable fuel than any other part of that body. So, if you are a hunter smart enough to understand where the value is, and orcas are exactly that smart, you don't waste your time and your energy chewing through tough muscle. You go straight for the prize. One great white liver can be a complete, enormous, energy-loaded meal. Everything else is just packaging. And there may be a second reason, a quieter one, that makes the strategy even smarter. A shark's skin is not skin the way we think of it. It is covered in dermal denticles, tiny tooth-like scales, so rough that old sailors used dried shark skin as sandpaper. Run your hand one way and it is smooth, run it the other way and it will take the print right off your fingers. To an animal that depends entirely on its teeth to eat for the rest of its life, gnawing through that abrasive hide over and over would be like dragging your molars across a file. So, by opening the shark once, precisely, and slipping the liver out through that single soft incision, the orcas may be doing something we would recognize from a careful craftsman, protecting their most important tools. Taking the soft, valuable center, sire, and leaving the armored shell behind. The more you look at it, the less it resembles an animal feeding, and the more it resembles a technique. A learned, refined, repeatable technique. And that word, learned, is where this story stops being about two whales and starts being about something much larger. Because this wasn't a single bad season. This wasn't a one-off, a freak event you could explain away and forget. When researchers finally went back through the record and laid every incident end to end, the pattern was undeniable. The clean tear at the shoulder, the missing liver, the intact carcass. It showed up on great whites, and it showed up on seven-gill sharks, another shark species with its own rich, oily liver, going back to at least 2015. Year after year, the same signature on the same coast, accompanied again and again by the same two collapsed fins cutting the surface. And then came the day that turned a worrying pattern miss into something that made the scientists stop and go quiet. And in a single day off Cape Town, the pair tore through not one shark, not two, but 19 seven-gill sharks. 19 in one day. Bodies scattered across a stretch of coast, each one opened the same careful way, each one missing the same organ. Picture the people who found them, walking that shoreline, counting, 1, then 5, then 10, then more, and slowly understanding that they were not looking at an accident of nature. They were looking at the output of two animals operating like a machine, with terrifying efficiency, on a scale nobody had thought possible from a pair acting alone. But for all of that, the carcasses, the count, the surgical wounds, there was still one thing missing. One thing that science, with all its careful caution, needed before it would say out loud what everyone watching the water already suspected. Nobody had actually seen it, not the whole thing, not from start to finish, not clearly enough to film, not clearly enough to prove. The killings kept arriving as aftermath, evidence on a beach, testimony from a carcass, but the act itself was still happening down there in the green dark, out of sight, sealed away from the one thing that could confirm it beyond any doubt. And so, the question that hung over the whole coast was simple and maddening, and it would take a machine in the sky to finally answer it. That machine was a drone. In May of 2022, with cameras finally in the right place at the right moment, the operators lifted a drone over the water just as the two familiar fins appeared, one bending left, one bending right. And for the first time, the lens caught what had only ever been guessed at. From above, the water turned glassy and revealing, and there it was, the pair closing on a great white, herding it, controlling it, working it the way two sheepdogs work a single sheep. And then the strike. The footage isn't long, and it isn't loud, but it is absolutely conclusive. Port and starboard hunting great whites with their own bodies on camera. The aftermath on the beaches finally had a face. The sealed testimony had a witness. Sit with what that confirmation meant. For years, the evidence had pointed one way, and the scientists had held the line, refusing to say more than the data allowed. Now the data had caught up to the dread, and just when it seemed the story had reached its limit, two whales working together, a duo doing what whole pods are supposed to do, the story went further than anyone was ready for. Because in June of 2023, the drone caught something that broke the last rule we thought we understood. Starboard, alone, no partner herding from the other side, no team, no second fin. One orca against one great white, and it was over in under 2 minutes. Picture that. 2 minutes. He took the shark by the pectoral fin, that broad wing of muscle a great white uses to steer and to stay aloft in the water, gripped it, turned the animal, and opened it. And when the drone pulled in close afterward, there he was at the surface with the prize already in his mouth. The liver. Photographed, plain as day, clamped between his teeth. One whale, one shark, one organ, 2 minutes. I need you to hold on to how impossible that is. A great white is one of the most formidable predators that has ever lived, and a single orca dismantled one faster than it takes most of us to read a page. This was not a pack overwhelming prey by sheer numbers. This was mastery. This was a technique so refined that it no longer needed a partner at all. When the shark scientists studying these animals published the findings in the African Journal of Marine Science, the conclusion wasn't a guess anymore. It was a documented, peer-reviewed account of a behavior that is rewritten where the great white sits in its own ocean. And here is the part that should make the back of your neck go cold. Since 2017, the great whites have been leaving. The famous gathering places, the bay where cage divers once watched them rise like submarines, the cold green water where they patrolled for decades, have gone quiet. Researchers tracked 14 tagged great whites, and the pattern was the same every single time. The instant those two orcas appeared, the sharks fled, fast and far, and did not come back for weeks. And when the king of an ecosystem abandons his throne, everything underneath shifts. Other sharks have moved into the empty water. The seals, suddenly free of the predator that kept them honest, have grown bold enough that they now harass the endangered penguins clinging to that coast. Remove one animal, and the whole web trembles. That is what fear can do without a single extra bite. So, is the case solved? Largely, yes. We know who, we know how, we know why. The liver, that dense furnace of energy, and very likely the gentler price it asks of their teeth. What we still don't know is the ending. The honest truth, the one the researchers won't pretend past, is this. Nobody is certain whether the great whites are gone for good or simply relocated, waiting somewhere down the coast for the water to feel safe again. And there is a quieter worry underneath it all, that port and starboard may be teaching this. The technique, learned and refined by two, could be passed to others, the way knowledge always travels through these astonishingly social minds. Think about what that means. If we got this wrong, if we genuinely believe the great white was the untouchable top of its world, and it turns out two clever animals could empty an entire coast of them with a trick they invented and perfected, then what else are we wrong about? What other certainties are sitting in our textbooks right now, true only because nothing has yet thought of a way around them? I keep coming back to that first clean tear on the sand, a body delivered to the shore like a message in a bottle, opened with terrible care, the most valuable thing inside already taken. For years that message washed up and we couldn't read it. Now we can. And it says something humbling. The ocean is still teaching, and we are still, at best, slow students standing at the edge of the water, reading what it chooses to send us. So, I want to leave the last question with you, because I genuinely don't know the answer, and neither yet does anyone else. Do you think the great whites are gone from that coast forever, driven out for good by two animals smarter than we ever gave them credit for? Or are they out there right now, waiting? And one day soon, they'll come back. Tell me what you believe in the comments, and tell me why. And if you want the next sealed piece of evidence, the next impossible thing the deep has already confessed. If we're willing to listen, it's out there waiting too. Stay with me and we'll go read it together.